All right, so we'll just dive into the World Handicap System here. Just want to thank you guys for joining me today. If anybody joined my presentation last year or watched any of the videos, the presentation is very similar, so this will basically just be a refresher for you guys as we get going. All right, so as a reminder, before the World Handicap System was in place, there were 6 different handicapping systems that were in use around the world, with the USGA handicap system being the predominantly used handicapping system, as you can see from this map with all the red that's all around there. So with the World Handicapping System, it took all 6 of these and unified them into one, and it took aspects from each of these to use, and you'll see, you know, with the changes that we saw, it's not just, you know, the USGA making all these changes. They definitely looked at all these different handicapping systems. So with the World Handicapping System, it's really just making handicaps more portable and allowing people to compete on a fair and equal basis all around the world, no matter where they go. So obviously golf is a global game. We can play all over the world, so it really just makes sense to have one universal system in place.
The World Handicap System is designed to welcome all players to the sport, regardless of age, gender, ability, or nationality, no matter what sort of golf they like to play or how much time they have. All players are encouraged to get a Handicap Index, giving them a sense of their golfing ability, allowing them to track their performance, and providing a score to aim for, no matter where they're playing or how well they play. It's a myth that you must be good to have a handicap. The whole purpose of the World Handicap System is to allow for greater enjoyment where they're playing for competitive reasons or having fun. With a maximum handicap index, the World Handicap System is accessible and inclusive, meeting the needs of players new to the game, as well as those that have played for a long time. To obtain a first handicap index, a player needs to complete a minimum number of holes in an authorized format of play and submit scores in accordance with the rules of handicapping. The system is flexible. Players may submit 18-hole or 9-hole scores if more appealing, or any combination of the two. For players with limited time, the rules of handicapping help support a good pace of play. Where the format allows, players are encouraged to pick up when they have reached their maximum hole score or when they are out of a hole in a team or match play format. With scores submitted promptly after each round, a player's handicap index can be updated ready for the next day or soon after, giving them instant feedback on their progress. There is a balance to be drawn between inclusiveness and the safeguards required to ensure your handicap index truly reflects your golfing ability. A ball run of form won't increase your handicap index too quickly, while rapidly improving ability is recognized by applying additional reductions to your index for exceptional scores. Your score must either be verified by a marker or reviewed by peers. If you fail to submit a score when required, a penalty score may be applied to your scoring record. Golf clubs and handicap committees play a major role in welcoming new players to the sport and managing their handicaps. They may offer separate competitions for different handicap ranges or separate scratch and handicap prizes, allowing players of all abilities to enjoy the thrill of competition. At least once a year, handicap committees will review players' handicaps to ensure they continue to reflect their ability. These measures combine to maintain the integrity of the game while promising a system that works for every player, whether competing for a trophy or playing their first round.
All right, so that video just gave us a brief overview of the World Handicap System. So now we'll just get into the fundamentals of handicapping. So the World Handicap and the system. So the course rating system is something that did not change when the World Handicap System was implemented, but it is something that's now being adopted by other countries that weren't necessarily using the course rating system. All right, and the World Handicap System basically has a few main purposes here. It's making it more inclusive, making it a lot easier for people to get and maintain a handicap. It's making it more portable, as I mentioned before, from course to course and now country to country, and more consistent. The calculation is the same all over the world now. So it's allowing players, again, to compete on a fair and equal basis no matter where they go, because that calculation of their handicap index is now the same. So just a few key definitions. These are all terms that I'm sure we've seen last year and have a good handle on, but again, we'll go over it again. So the low handicap index is achieved by a player. It's the lowest handicap index achieved by a player within the last 12 months. The hard and soft cap, it's a reduction or limit on the increase of a player's handicap index over a rolling 12-month period measured against the player's low handicap index within that period. The playing condition calculation, it's a procedure used to evaluate if a course and or weather conditions on the day of play deviate from normal playing conditions to the extent that they have a significant impact on players' performance. The exceptional score reduction. So it's a score differential which is at least 7 strokes better than the player's handicap index at the time the round was played. Net double bogey. So this is the maximum score for a hole for handicap purposes. So it's part of the hole plus any handicap strokes plus the 2 strokes for double bogey. And then net par, just the new term for par plus, but same concept. All of these terms and all of these concepts we'll get into in a little bit here in the presentation. All right, so the course rating system. So again, it's the same system that was used before the World Handicap System. It's used in the United States and other countries, but now it's again being adopted by many other countries so that we can have this World Handicap System. So it really addresses the portability of handicaps and helps to adjust the player's handicap according to the relative difficulty of the course being played. So what is a course rating? So a course rating is the evaluation of the playing difficulty of a course for scratch golfers. All right, so you'll see this number all the time with your tees. So it's expressed, the example here is 71.8. And then we have a bogey rating. So the bogey rating is evaluation of the playing difficulty of a course for bogey players. So we consider bogey players for women to be about a 24 handicap and men to be about a 20 handicap index. So this isn't necessarily a number that you guys will see, but it is something when our course rating team goes out to evaluate a golf course, we're gathering data for scratch golfers and bogey golfers. All right. So we use both the course rating and the bogey rating to determine the slope rating. So we take the difference between the course rating and bogey rating, multiply it by a factor, and then that's how we're getting the slope rating of a golf course. So in this example, it's 127. All right, and so a course of standard difficulty has a slope rating of 113, so just for reference. And then the course handicap calculation here. So it's basically a course handicap is the number of strokes that a player receives to play down to the par of the tees that they're being played. Okay, so this is probably the most significant change that was added to the handicapping system. Prior to the World Handicap System, your course handicap was the number of strokes needed to play to the course rating. But now, since par is a more significant value, it's the number of strokes needed to play to par. And with that, they've added math into the course handicap calculation, as you'll see here, with course rating minus par. And I'll talk more about par later on, and you've heard it before, but par is definitely more significant. It's a new benchmark here. So it's used in the course handicap, it's used with net double bogey, with net par. So it's really important that we are establishing the correct par. And the USGA basically wants to see, par kept the same across all tee sets for each gender, unless it can't be done. Of course, there's certainly some examples out there. I can think of 1 or 2 here in New Hampshire where it just can't be the same. So that's understandable. So with the course handicap, with the change in the calculation, I just want to kind of show you guys an example of a comparison here. On the left, the chart is without course rating minus par in the calculation. So that's the old system. And then on the right, it's the new system. So for a scratch golfer in this case, in the old system, they were a 0 across the board, no matter what tee they were playing. But now in the World Handicap System, you know, on this particular course across all these tee sets, it's a 7-stroke difference. So that's pretty significant right there that we're seeing. And I think this is a well-liked change in the World Handicap System for golfers. And then here's the example for a 15 handicapper. Okay, again, on the left, there was only a 3-stroke difference. You know, when you're going over 2,000 yards, you know, only 3 strokes, that's not very significant. That's not really helping the golfer out very much. But on the right-hand side, it's now a 10-stroke difference, which, again, like I said, people are liking this change. It's been really helpful. All right, so playing handicap. This is just a similar concept. It's taking your course handicap and multiplying it by the handicap allowance. Okay, it's a fairly simple concept. One thing I will note is that rounding in the math here only happens one time. It happens at the very end. In the old system, you used to find the course handicap, get it to a whole number, and then you would apply the handicap allowance and round again. But now we're getting the course handicap to that decimal place and then doing the multiplication for the handicap allowance and then rounding at the very end. So that could really change things if people don't understand that rounding happens only one time in this calculation. For anybody that uses Golf Genius, they have a really good example in the knowledge base that really spells it out well and shows how there could be a difference. It gives really good examples. So I would certainly go to the knowledge base and search playing handicap if you have any questions, and it spells it out really well. The other thing with this is if people are playing from different tee sets and there is different pars for each tee set, then the player, there is a difference, there is an adjustment here for the different par. You're subtracting the difference in the player playing from the higher par will receive the additional strokes in that case. If you do have the same par at a course across all the tee sets, then there would be no adjustment. But again, something to keep in mind if there is different par. All right, so the minimum number of scores to obtain a handicap index. Okay, so it's 54 holes made up of any combination of 9 or 18 holes. There's no time limit on completing the submission of these scores to get your handicap index. And it's strongly recommended that the initial scores are submitted hole by hole to better assess the potential of the golfer. But it's certainly not a requirement. This is one of the new changes that plays into the inclusivity of the World Handicap System. So it's encouraging golfers who play more sporadically to establish a handicap because it is a lot easier. It doesn't require as many scores. And then from there, maybe they start playing more because they can start to see an improvement in their handicap index once they establish one. Okay, in the old system, they needed to have 5 18-hole scores in their scoring record to get a handicap index. So now it's down to 3 18-hole scores, which is really great to see. And another part of the inclusivity of the World Handicap System is they raised the maximum handicap index now to 54, and that's for both men and women. Prior, for men, it was 36.4, and for women, it was 40.4. So this is a big jump, but again, it's getting more golfers into the game, getting them to establish a handicap index and making it as easy as possible for them. So really, it's helping those higher handicappers better track their progress, stay more motivated, play more, and keep playing, which is really great. All right, so maximum score for handicap purposes is now net double bogey. So this is replacing the equitable stroke control that we used to have. Similar concept, even the best golfers will have bad holes. So one bad hole shouldn't define a player's ability. So this is why we have a maximum score hole for handicap purposes. So here's the concept. We have par +2 for double bogey, and then plus or minus handicap strokes received or given on a hole. So here's an example. A player with a course handicap of 11 receives 1 stroke on the first 11 allocated stroke holes. On a par 4 hole with a stroke index of 6, the player's net double bogey score is calculated as follows. So par 4, 2 strokes for double bogey. They receive 1 stroke here, so their maximum score is 7. And this is just for handicap purposes for when they post their score. If it's a competition, they're certainly still going to be using their gross score here. No adjustments like this. No maximum score. One thing, if golfers are using the GIN mobile app to post their scores or GIN.com and they're entering scores hole by hole, the adjustment is actually automatic. So they can just enter their gross scores, and because the system already knows what tee they're playing, what their handicap index is, the system will just automatically adjust those scores for them. Okay, but when entering any total scores, if they enter an 18-hole score or 2 9-hole scores, they will need to make the adjustment themselves. So it is good to make sure golfers do understand the concept of net double bogey. And then the guideline for the most likely score. So when a player starts but does not complete a hole, the score recorded for handicap purposes is the most likely score. So now we have a table that kind of spells out the guidelines here. So basically on a putting green within 5 feet of the hole, they're adding 1 stroke to their score that they had there. Between 5 feet and 20 feet or 20 yards of the hole, they're adding 2 or 3 strokes. This is all depending on the difficulty of the green and especially the ability of the player. Okay, so if they're a higher handicapper, they might be adding 3 because that's what they think it would take them to get the ball in the hole. And then beyond 20 yards, they're adding 3 or 4. Again, same concept. Position of the ball, difficulty of the green. They're taking all of these, into account when determining what their most likely score would have been. Okay, so this provides more consistency for score posting when it comes to match play or other formats of play where players are picking up on a hole, and it just takes the subjectivity out of it. And then when a hole is not played, the concept is net par. So basically, it's the same thing. It used to be called par plus. But if they did not play a hole, they're taking part of the hole and then adding any handicap strokes that they would have received on that hole. All right, so not a change, but just a change in the name. So it's net par. So acceptability of scores. I'll just run through these bullet points. They're not a change, but we'll just review them. So scores that are acceptable are scores from an authorized format of play, which meets all the provisions set out by the rules of handicapping. Scores in both match play and stroke play, including multi-ball and team competitions where players have not competed 1 or more holes, or players are requested to pick up when out of contention of the hole. Scores on all courses where the current course rating and slope rating made during an active season, both home and away. All right, scores made under the rules of golf and the modified rules of golf for players with disabilities, when accompanied by at least 1 person. So that bullet point there, it's not brand new, but in the last few years it is new. So if someone goes out to play quick 9 holes after work by themselves, that score is not going to be acceptable for posting. You do have to play with at least 1 other person in order to be able to post that score. And then when a player follows a model local rule, even if the committee has not adopted it, so example, the alternative option to stroke and distance or preferred lies. So those scores are still acceptable. Scores that are not acceptable for handicap purposes, some examples here are, alternate shot formats, scrambles, or when someone's being coached. There are times when in a competition somebody will get disqualified for some reason or another. So if they're getting disqualified and the reason is they're gaining some kind of significant advantage out on the golf course, then that score is not going to be acceptable. But if there's a DQ out there where they're not gaining a significant advantage, it could just be that, you know, they signed for an incorrect scorecard. You know, that happens, but that score actually would be acceptable as long as they're posting the correct score. All right, and then 9-hole scores. For a 9-hole score to be acceptable for handicap purposes, a minimum of 7 holes must be played. For 18 holes, a minimum of 14 holes would need to be played. So 7 for 9, 14 for 18 holes. Okay, so if a player plays 7 or 8 holes, a 9-hole score will be produced by adding a score of net par for the remaining holes that they did not play. All right. And then not a change, but when someone posts a 9-hole score, it needs to have another 9-hole score to combine with to form an 18-hole score differential and be posted to their scoring record. So if a player plays more than 9 holes but fewer than 14, holes 10 through 13 will just be discarded and a 9-hole score would be posted. Okay. And again, just keeping in mind, we're using the concept net par for holes not played. So if someone plays at least 14 holes and then it gets dark and they come in, that's fine. They're going to use net par for 15 through 18 in that case. And then the time frame for submitting scores. This is really important in the World Handicap System. It's very important that somebody posts their score as soon as possible on the day of play and preferably before midnight. Handicap Indexes update once a day now. We no longer have to wait 2 weeks for them to update, which is great. So if somebody either posts a score or if a score was edited for any reason by a club admin or by the NHGA, then their handicap index will update overnight. It's very important that golfers post their scores immediately because of the playing condition calculation. So let's just continue to hammer that home to golfers that we would like them to be posting their scores, right after they play, just so they're not forgetting. All right, so I'll pause right now and I'll just check for any questions. Just a reminder, if you have questions along the way, feel free to type them in and I'll pause periodically like this to answer them. But I don't see any right now, so I'll just kind of keep on going. And now we're just going to get into the handicap formula.
Every golfer is different. Every golf course is different. Every day is different. The aim of the World Handicap System is to take all these differences and produce players' golfing ability. A handicap index reflecting the score a player can achieve when playing well. To do that, it must start with a handicap calculation which balances responsive. The handicap calculation is your demonstrating how well you played your round relative to the course's difficulty, as determined by its course rating and slope rating, and any conditions that might have made the course harder or easier to play on. A record of your scores is maintained, and your handicap index is based on an average of the best 8 of your last 20 scores. Because your worst scores are discarded, your handicap index reflects the score you're likely to achieve on your better days. The more scores you can submit, the more accurately your handicap index will reflect your golfing ability. While any player can have a bad day or a run of poor form, form is temporary. That's why the handicap calculation does more than just look at your most recent best scores. It retains a memory of your lowest handicap index during the past 12 months and provides mechanisms to ensure bad days don't cause your current handicap index to increase too quickly from that low index. Under normal circumstances, your handicap index should never increase more than 5 strokes above your low handicap index. Index over a rolling 12-month period. Players have great days too. Juniors and beginners in particular can improve dramatically over a short period of time. The handicap calculation can identify this, applying additional reductions to a handicap index when a player achieves a score of 7 strokes or more below their current handicap index. A calculation won't always detect a real change in a player's ability. For that reason, each golf club's handicap committee has the tools and can adjust a player's handicap index to better reflect their current ability. All these elements come together as your handicap index is revised promptly, ready for the next day or soon after. The World Handicap System delivers a handicap index to all players that is calculated in a consistent way across the globe. It allows players everywhere to continue to enjoy the game they love, wherever they play and whoever they're playing with or against.
There are 5 significant changes that happened to the calculation. All right, so the minimum number of scores that were required to get your initial handicap index went down to 3. The number of differentials being used is now 8 of 20. The playing condition calculation is now in there. An exceptional score reduction that considers all scores. And then the addition of the soft cap and the hard cap to limit the upward movement of a player's handicap index. And we'll get into all of these. All right, so the number of differentials being used to calculate a handicap index. Once we get to 20 scores, it is averaging the lowest 8, but until then, there is a chart to show you how many differentials are being used. So we see at 3, 4, and 6, there is an adjustment. So it's not just averaging the lowest, we're actually adding an adjustment here. And that adjustment is a safeguard to ensure that the field is protected from players that have a minimal number of scores in their scoring record. Okay, so with a limited number of scores in there, the adjustment is necessary to, again, protect the player's ability. And it is said that a player plays to their ability about 1 out of 5 times. So there is a chance that at this number of scores, at a low number of scores, they haven't even played to their ability yet. So that adjustment is necessary. All right. So here's the calculation of the score differential. It's very similar to what it used to be, but now we're seeing the math for the playing condition calculation adjustment. So that's really the only change that we'll see here. And the PCC adjustment is really going to be conservative in nature, and the majority of the time it's 0. So the calculation of a score differential is really staying about the same. And for the handicap index, we are averaging the 8 of the lowest 20 score differentials in a player's scoring record out of the most recent 20 scores. In the past, it was 10 out of 20 with a 96% bonus for excellence. So now with 8 out of 20, it allows for greater responsiveness to good scores, and it's eliminating that need for the bonus for excellence. So it's making things more accurate in determining a player's potential ability. And then getting into the playing condition calculation here, this is one of the modern features of the World Handicap System. So when adverse weather conditions or abnormal course setup causes scores to be unusually high or low on a given day, a playing condition calculation adjusts score differentials to better reflect the player's actual performance on that day. So again, it's simple and conservative in nature, and it's applied in integer values from -1 to +3. Okay. So kind of here's what it needs. So it's performed once a day. It considers acceptable scores submitted on a golf course, including all rated tees in from both genders. It requires at least 8 acceptable scores submitted by players with a handicap index of 36 or below. Anything above 36, those players' scores tend to be more volatile. So they really can't be considered for this. So it's applied to the calculation of the score differentials for all players. So even if somebody did play and they have a higher handicap, higher than 36, they will still get the PCC adjustment. Their score just won't be used in the calculation of it. And then it includes both 9 and 18 hole scores. Okay. So the PCC really could just be a good indicator of whether a course rating needs to be reviewed. If are being applied on multiple days during the week, then it may be something to look at. We should also consider if the course setup is playing unusually easy or hard, depending on if you have a tournament or just, again, how it's set up in general. I will say in 2020, I did run a report at the end of the year looking at the PCC results for all courses. There was nothing out of the ordinary, which is great. I don't feel that we need to review any of the course ratings based on the playing condition calculations that were applied over the year. One example I'll give you on course setup this year, I did see a PCC applied for the 3 days that we held the New Hampshire Mid-Amateur Championship at Lake Winnipesaukee. I'll tell you that the weather was not great. It was very windy, it was very cold, and the setup was harder than it might normally be. So there was a PCC that day. So again, if you guys have, your club championship or, member guest and things are set up a lot harder, and you see a PCC, then that's just something to keep in mind. That course setup could cause this as well. All right, then the exceptional score reduction. Okay, so this replaced 10-3, where it was taking 2 exceptional tournament scores before. But now with the exceptional score reduction, this could happen with any one score. It just takes 1 score to reduce a handicap index. All right, and so you can see in the chart here, if the score differential is 7 strokes, at least 7 strokes lower than the handicap index at the time of playing, then there would be a -1 adjustment applied to the previous 20 score differentials in a player's scoring record. And then if the differential is 10 strokes lower, then you would see a -2 happening. I don't think that's all that common, but we certainly see reductions happening. Fairly easy. And so it really just needs 1 score. So we'll just kind of get into an example here. So the player posted an exceptional score on 522, which resulted in a -1 adjustment to their previous 20 differentials. So we see that there highlighted. All right, the player posted a second exceptional score on 9.5, which resulted in a -1 adjustment to their previous 20 again. So in this case, I will point out that there can be multiple adjustments to different scores. So you'll see that 17 through 22 all have 2 -1s happening because it can pile on top of each other. But now as the player is posting more scores that do not have a reduction, it is filtering out some of these scores. So 21 and 22 are no longer being used. So as the player will play more, they'll eventually filter out the 17, 18, 19, and 20 scores. And then as they continue to not have any, exceptional scores on their record, they will eventually filter out all of the -1s from their scoring record. So the more they play, the more they will filter it out here. The demonstrated ability of a player over a 36-day period preceding the most recent score on the player's scoring record, and provide the reference point against which the current handicap index can be compared. And then this example here just points out that the low handicap index could technically get to be more than a year old. It just depends on, when the player played last and how frequently they're playing. So the low handicap index is only established once they have 20 scores in their record. So anybody with less than 20 scores would not have a low handicap index just yet. All right, so your handicap index should never increase more than 5 strokes over your low handicap index over that rolling 12-month period. It is important to note that there's no limit on how much a handicap index can decrease from exceptional scores, but there is a limit on how much it can increase, and it should never go more than 5 strokes over that low handicap index. Cap procedure. So there's a soft cap and a hard cap, and they limit the extreme upward movement of a player's handicap index within a 12-month period. So the soft cap suppresses the upward movement by 50% after a 3-stroke increase over the low handicap index. And then the hard cap restricts the upward movement to 5 strokes over the low handicap index. And again, this procedure does not take place until somebody has 20 scores in their scoring record. Okay, so 20 scores is where they're getting that low handicap index, and that low handicap index is the reference point for this soft cap and hard cap procedure. And now we're just going to go into examples here. I'll kind of walk you through the math behind it. It can be kind of confusing to explain, but we'll just go through it. So player A has a low handicap index of 10.0. His current 8 of 20 average is 15.2. All right, so now we're going to subtract the low handicap index from the current 8 of 20 average. So 15.2 minus 10, we're getting 5.2. Okay, now we have to determine how much greater than 3 it is. All right, so it's 2.2. And then because this is a soft cap, we're taking 50% of that, 1.1. So we're taking 15.2, subtracting 1.1, and we get 14.1. And that's what this person's handicap index will result in because of a soft cap. And this is okay to have because that's only 4.1 above their low handicap index, so we don't need the hard cap in this case. So the hard cap example, player B has a low handicap index of 10.0. His current 8 of 20 average is 17.4. Again, we're doing the same math, 17.4 minus 10, we're getting 7.4. Take that, subtract 3, 4.4, and then 50% of that will give us 2.2. All right, and so 17.4 minus 2.2 gives us 15.2. But we'll notice that handicap index is now more than 5 strokes above their low handicap index. So the hard cap procedure comes into play here, and it's restricting it to just 15, okay, because it cannot go up more than 5 strokes above their low handicap index. I hope that makes sense, kind of walking through that. But if you have questions, feel free to type them in. And then just moving on to daily revisions before we kind of close up this chapter here. So like I mentioned before, handicap indexes are revised every single day now. It happens overnight. Okay, so players should submit their scores as soon as possible after the round is completed and before midnight. And then this is to ensure that the score will be used for the playing condition calculation. And a player's handicap can also be revised by a committee adjustment. Okay, so if a player plays twice in a day and they post both of their scores, their handicap index is still only updating that one time. It's happening overnight, okay? And it will, somebody's handicap index will, like I said before, update if they posted a score or if the committee adjustment happened to one of the scores, or if the NHA adjusted any of the scores, something like that. So any questions there? I'll just pause real quick. Doesn't look like it. Okay. We'll just continue on. So the club handicap committee responsibilities here. So I'll go through this real quick. So it's strongly recommended that the handicap committee conducts a handicap review at least once a year for all players for which it is responsible. The WHS compliant technology provides reports to assist handicap committees identify those players requiring a handicap review. So basically there's plenty of reports in the admin portal for you guys to use to kind of conduct a review. And then a player can also request to have a handicap review if they think that their handicap doesn't reflect how they're playing lately. So if somebody recently had surgery of any kind and then in their game is kind of worse than what it was before surgery, somebody can certainly request to have their handicap reviewed in this case. So a player must be made aware of and be involved in the handicap review process and be able to appeal any decision. So we just have to keep players in the loop on what's going on behind the scenes. So adjusting a player's handicap index. So when a handicap review has been completed, the committee can adjust the player's handicap index to better reflect their demonstrated ability based on the results of the analysis. So it must be a minimum of 1 full stroke, and except in exceptional circumstances, which we likely won't see, it should only increase by up to 5 strokes above the low handicap index. We just want to keep that consistent with the cap procedure and that we're not inflating handicaps unnecessary. And again, there's no limit on how far downwards you can decrease a handicap index. Similar to the exceptional score reduction, there's just no limit on how far down it can go. And then again, we can get into applying a penalty score. So if a player fails to submit a score from an authorized format, the handicap committee should investigate and take appropriate action. So if the reason was valid and an acceptable score is still discoverable and known, that score should be posted. If there's no valid reason and a score is still discoverable, that score should be posted. And then if a score is not discoverable, then a penalty score may be posted by the committee. And then in most serious cases, such as repeated failure, the committee has discretion to apply additional penalty scores, reset the player's handicap index, or consider other disciplinary procedures. So one of those procedures could be withdrawing the player's handicap index. So if you have a repeat offender who continuously does not post their scores for any reason and you've already talked to them, you can certainly withdraw their handicap index for a certain period of time. And the player does need to be notified of that period of time, okay? And then they need to be notified when it will be reinstated, because after withdrawing it, you do have to reinstate it. Any questions on the handicap committee responsibilities? All of it is spelled out in the book, but if you do have any questions on responsibilities of any kind, certainly let me know. I can help guide you in a certain direction. All right, and competition committee responsibilities. So the committee in charge of the competition may set a maximum limit for play within their terms of competition. So for example, they can set a maximum handicap index for entry, a maximum handicap index a player is permitted to use, a maximum course handicap, or a maximum playing handicap. Okay, for example, a limit of 18 may be set by the committee, with higher handicap index players being restricted to playing from a handicap index of 18 for the purpose of the competition. All right, so in this case, they are allowing players with a higher handicap index above 18 to play, but they are restricted to playing at 18 for this competition. And with all of these things, it needs to be spelled out for all the players, and they need to be made aware of this fact before playing. So basically, like, the competition committee is determining who's eligible to compete, and as well as, you know, what handicap they may use. All right, and the committee in charge of the competition may reserve the right to adjust the playing handicap for an entrant within the terms of competition, where they have evidence that the player's handicap index does not reflect the demonstrated ability. That's pretty straightforward. You do have that ability to change the playing handicap, but the committee in charge of a competition does not have the ability to change somebody's handicap index. They can't modify handicap index, but they can modify the playing handicap that they're using. And then multi-round competitions is something that's been certainly talked about a lot, but it's highly recommended that committees in charge of competitions are taking handicaps from either the start of the competition or a date prior to the competition and using that same handicap index throughout the competition. And then just making sure that players know which date is being used for the handicap index. Just make that clear to them and make it clear to them that you're not updating between rounds. And although you between rounds, you should still be posting scores. You know, if you're using Golf Genius or another tournament software where you can post scores on players' behalves, then certainly post those scores at the end of each day. Or if you're not doing that, certainly instruct golfers to be posting those scores after each day. But it is highly recommended to not be updating handicap indexes. And then look at handicap allowances here. There are new charts in Appendix C. They're no longer gender specific, so you'll see that here. It's just one recommendation for men and for women, and they have all these different formats spelled out there. So the committee should determine this and make that clear to the golfers as well as to, you know, what percentage of their handicap is being used. And then also keeping in mind that these are just recommendations. So it's not something that you definitely have to go with, but it's certainly just a guideline to help you out. And it's typically the most commonly used and best practice here.
What will the World Handicap System mean for you, the player? It all starts with a measure of your golfing ability, calculated the same way for every player around the world. A handicap index that you can take with you anywhere and use at whatever course you're playing. Before which to play, which can be different for each member of your group. Every set of teams will have a course and slope rate based on course difficulty. These will normally be available on the look chart near the first team now. Next, decide the determine the handicap allowance you will be given. Together, the course rating, slope rating, and handicap allowance convert your handicap index into a playing handicap, representing the number of strokes you receive for the round, providing you the best opportunity of doing well, whoever you're playing. Some formats of play aren't suitable for submitting a score for handicap purposes. If you're playing around and would like to submit your score, you may need to check the procedures before you play. If you're ever in doubt about procedures relating to handicapping, check the club where you're playing. During the round itself, go out and play, enjoying the game as you always would. Knowing how many strokes you receive for the round also lets you know the maximum number of strokes that you'll receive on each hole. While one bad hole might mean you don't win the competition, you can still submit an acceptable score for handicap purposes. If the format of play allows, you should pick up when you reach your maximum hole score, keeping your game and the game of everyone else on the course moving along. At the end of your round, add up your score, including any penalty strokes and any applicable adjustments for holes not played or where you didn't hole out. When your score is ready, make sure it's verified as required, then simply submit your score in accordance with club policy. By submitting your score as soon as possible, you ensure all necessary calculations, adjustments, and safeguards can be applied, giving you an accurate, up-to-date handicap index ready for the next day or soon after. The more scores you submit, the more accurately your handicap index will reflect your ability. Up to date, easy to understand, and adaptable. The World Handicap System lets you play the way you always have, as well as giving you a handicap index that will travel anywhere you decide to play.
All right, so again, I'll just check for questions. I haven't seen any come in, so I'll just kind of continue on. And just into the last part here, and then we'll wrap it up. So a home club. So a golfer should have just one handicap index and one scoring record. So if they are a member in Florida and up here in New Hampshire, they really should have one GIN number, and then that player should determine which one is going to be their home club, because that home club is the club that has authority over administering their handicap index and making sure that the handicap committee is doing a review and following all the rules of handicapping here. So they can be a member of multiple clubs, but for handicap purposes, a golfer does need to designate a home club. And then getting into the stroke index allocations. So in the old handicapping system, the method of determining allocations was basically requiring you guys to collect a lot of scorecards and kind of determine things that way. It could have been very difficult to follow, I would imagine. But new in the World Handicap System, the recommended method to determine stroke index allocations is by using course rating data. So it's taking subjectivity out of it and really just relying on the data that the course rating team goes out and gathers. So it's really just a report that I run from the course rating system, and it's based on the most commonly played tee set for each gender. So if it's something that you're not currently utilizing and want to see what the report comes up with, certainly let me know. I can run that for your course. But again, so it's taking, it's using a triad method again. So it's trying to put the number one stroke hole in the middle triad in holes 4 through 6, and then you'll see that there's not another low stroke hole right next to it. So it's considering 2 through 6 to be low. So there's nothing right next to it. It's well spread out, as you can see in this example. You know, the number one stroke hole is 6, and then 3 is the third hole. So, you know, well spread out. And again, with the course rating data being used, these are still going to be just recommendations that are going to at the club. The club ultimately has the final say in this. So if I run a report and you guys just don't agree, that's completely fine. It can be changed. It's just a recommendation. You guys certainly know your courses better than the system would. And then talking about PAR, like I mentioned before, PAR is a benchmark now. It's being the handicap and the course handicap calculation. It's used for net par, it's used for net double bogey. So it's really important that we're establishing the correct par for each course. And then so the book really just gives a chart to give general guidelines. So you're going to see overlapping in yardages here. So there is no set par. It's really, you know, how is the course playing? It's really, you know, up to you guys to determine. But we do want to see par to be the same for men, and then par to be the same for women for all tee sets. So as close as possible that we can follow that rule, the better. And I know most courses already do, which is fantastic. But again, par, just keeping that in mind, it's really important in the World Handicap System. And then the temporary rating, this is just a, for unrated tee sets. It's a similar procedure that we had before. It is slightly different. So again, if someone's going out and they're not playing from a normal tee set, and to determine, you know, how they're going to post that score, they're locating the nearest set of rated tees for the appropriate gender. They would determine the measured difference between and what they played. So for differences under 100 yards, there's no adjustment necessary, and then scores would just be posted as normal. For differences between 100 and 300 yards, there is a table in the book that shows you, how to add or subtract the course rating value and the slope rating value for correctly posting. And then anything beyond 300 yards difference is not acceptable to be posted, which we really wouldn't see that very much. But if there's something like somebody wants to play a combo tee, that's very easy for me to add into the system. So if you guys want to add any combo tees to your courses, certainly reach out to me. We'll get that added in. It's very easy. And of course, if you made any permanent modifications to your course, reach out to me again, and we'll try to get some course raters out there to reevaluate that hole or holes that the modifications have been made to.
No two golf courses play the same. A score of 87 on a difficult course might be a better performance than a score of 85 on an easy one. It's not just courses that differ. Each player will perform differently, even on the same course. The scratch player, a golfer with a 0 index, will have a different experience from the bogey player, a golfer with a handicap index of around 20 to 24. Playing a round of golf on the same course at the same time in normal conditions, the bogey player will find more challenges with distance, accuracy, and dealing with obstacles. Course ratings and slope ratings allow the handicap system to reflect this as part of the conversion of a player's handicap index into a playing handicap, so that golfers of differing abilities can have a fair and enjoyable game. Course ratings reflect the playing difficulty under normal conditions for the scratch player. Slope ratings represent the difference in playing difficulty for all players compared to the scratch player. Being a fundamental part of the handicap system, course ratings are carried out methodically by qualified teams, trained by authorized associations. Ratings are based on normal course and weather conditions, with each hole being evaluated for effective playing length and obstacles. The effective length includes factors such as elevation, roll, wind, and altitude. Obstacles include factors such as trees, fairway width, penalty areas, recoverability from rough, and green size. All these factors are assessed separately for both the scratch and bogey player. Once the evaluation process has been completed, the course rating and slope rating is calculated for each set of tees. When it comes to playing a round of golf, course ratings and slope ratings should normally be available on a lookup chart or through an app, which can be used to determine your handicap and how many strokes you'll receive. In bringing together a course rating system that is already in use in many parts of the world, with a consistent method of calculating handicaps, the World Handicap System provides a handicap index which is truly portable, whoever you are, whatever your ability, and wherever you are playing in the world, enabling you to match your skills against other players of differing abilities and making the game even more enjoyable.